Charles, go for it, sir.
Hello. Video. Yep, big fan of yours and John Hutchison's. So I was kind of trying to categorize the different effects of the Hutchison or the EVOs, and I've kind of made a list here. So please tell me if there's any more, or if some of these maybe aren't accurate. So there's anti-gravity lift, there's disruption of material, there's transmutation, invisibility, there's fusion of dissimilar materials, there's time dilation, there's weather control and neutralizes radioactive material, distorts half-life of materials. There's even communication with spirits, and there was a view of an entity from a different dimension, and somehow uses 0-point energy. Was that correct?
Okay, do you want to just list one and I'll deal with that and we go on to the next one?
Okay, so starting from like anti-gravity lift, the Hutchison effect with like the cannonball lifting, you think EVOs are causing?
So essentially you get coherent matter. Coherent matter forms these north and south pseudo-magnetic monopole structures. They can skin surfaces. This is stated by Ken Shoulders in his interview, which I transcribed from 2010. And once they skin surfaces, if they are negating the action of the mode of whatever allows for gravity, then they will prevent the action of gravity on the thing that's contained within that skin. And so I believe that he used an iron cannonball. That's one of his most famous examples. And that's one of the heaviest things that's been caught on camera. And that is the perfect object to skin because it's effectively the structure, shape of a ball lightning. And ball lightning, as I said in my previous talk, has been known to carry matter. And in that, for instance, there was a ball lightning that came into the view of someone and it disheveled, and out of it came a couple of gallons or so of water, which means the inside of the ball lightning is below 100 degrees centigrade, and it was negating the action of gravity on those couple of gallons, which weighs, let's say, 9 kilos or 8 kilos, depending on where your gallons come from. And then there was another example where sand came out of one. And if that's the case, the sand hadn't sintered. So we know it's below 360 degrees centigrade or something. And it's also a lot heavier than water. And so here we have two examples of historical accounts of ball lightning. And absolutely, 100% certainly, the ball lightning is coherent matter, and coherent matter is what's going on in the Hutchison effect. So there's no reason to not expect the Hutchison effect to allow for a negation of the action of gravity.
Okay, another one was invisibility of materials. Some metal samples would turn transparent.
Okay, yeah, so there's a couple of things about that. There's a classic triangular one, which has a curved section on top. That one, and because I did a huge amount of video editing, and always with the best video editing equipment that was ever available at any point since video editing became a thing that you could do, I know that there's some transcribing gone from the original footage through a number of steps. And what you've got in that particular video, and I've discussed this at length with John, is frame blending artifacts that lead it to look like it's transparent. I don't believe that it was ever transparent. There is then another one, I think it might be a molybdenum bar, which is in a later period, and it comes up and it curves and it moves around, and it's very clear that the central section of that has gone transparent. I believe that that probably is a genuine transparency. Now, if you have coherent matter, then light will just, it will interact with it in a very, very different way. So whether it's wrapping around it like a black hole, or it's just passing through it and changing the translucency, either would do. I believe that, though, if you have intense electron clusters within matter, the light can pass directly through the material. And so, or it's kind of, it changes its refractive index and loses its opaqueness, let's put it like that, in the case of a metal. And so when you look at that particular video, how I'm seeing that is like, if you take, there's a guy called Thunderfoot, and he took potassium and calcium and mixed them into a liquid, and then he dropped them onto some water for this Coulombic explosion. Well, what is Coulombic explosion? Well, that's when you get a lot of charges going into the metal. What did he observe? It went from silvery to black to transparent, and just before it exploded, it was in the transparent state. And that is the point which is at, in my view, the highest coherence in the matter. So you physically see a metal becoming transparent in that Thunderfoot experiment. And I discussed this in my matter manipulations lecture that I gave in Copenhagen in 2017. You can go and look at that if you want on the MFMP's YouTube channel. So the transparency one, I believe, is a real thing, and I believe it's easily explainable by coherent matter.
Great, thank you. And for distortion of half-life, sometimes materials would seem to oxidize quicker. How would EVOs maybe cause that?
So if you can imagine an electron wants to grab an oxygen with a certain level of intensity, right? Now imagine you have an electron that has very many orders of magnitude more desire for oxygen. Because two reasons. One, oxygen likes to have an interaction with other materials that want to have an interaction with it ordinarily. But secondarily, oxygen, as I've argued in my monopole clutch presentation to the Russian community in 2020, it is the most paramagnetic most paramagnetic molecule of all of the elements before you get up to some of the lanthanides. You're looking at things like chromium and stuff like that up at that end. And so it's unique in that nature. And I believe that that's why it's so important to life in general. It's so important to ball lightning. It's so important, you know, for instance, Sundaresan and Bokras in, I think, 1994, they did a replication of the George Ohsawa carbon arc experiments underwater. And they found that if they had no dissolved oxygen in the water, they were unable to synthesize iron. And they argued that it was the fusion of 2 carbons and 2 oxygens goes to iron 56 and 1 for helium. But whatever, without the oxygen, you don't get that. And so I believe that the oxygen is absolutely critical because of its paramagnetic nature.
Great, thank you. And I think you mentioned a lot of this research not only require like one department in university, but would require multiple departments to study EVOs. And I agree. I'm a PhD in electrical engineering, and if you ever need help, I have access to a scanning electron microscope, for instance, and we can maybe do some for tests.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic, and we can never get enough time on a SEM. I've spent at least one day in each of the last 2 weeks on SEM, and I really seriously encourage you to look at what I've shared last night, for instance, because I believe we've categorically proven and can repeatably at will produce the magnetic core of ball lightning, and we can show the entire life cycle. And this is the same thing that did all the damage in the disruption in Hutchison samples. And tomorrow I will be giving a short presentation looking at some optical microscopy I took in Scotland in July last year with the collector that acquired the knife that fell into the aluminium. And you will see on the boundary layer the same structures that I shared from our Vega experiments in Holland. And you can also see that it's likely that the synthesized material is carbon, and that's the predominant output from these systems. And so that is on, and it's of the right amount of distance around the metal. And of course, you've got a paramagnetic element. The actual clusters will form on the aluminium because it's paramagnetic. Iron becomes magnetic when it's, sorry, steel becomes magnetic because enough of the atoms of iron collect clusters and then they find each other, and then you end up with areas becoming magnetic because it's not in the steel state. It changes like martensite or whatever. It changes its crystal structure to become magnetic, and so eventually the steel will be affected as well. So I'm going to be sharing that, and also going to be sharing some SEM of steel that where it has these golden ratio triangles, and that's the cone that goes into the pseudomagnetic monopole, and as it's capturing the material, and that's eaten out of the bit which split on iron. So iron magnetic materials behave much more differently to things like paramagnetic materials like aluminium, and for the same overall properties of the thing that's causing it. And so what you will find is transmutations occurring in this area where the material has disappeared. And so I'm going to be publishing that for the first time tomorrow. And so it's just, it never surprises me. Sorry, it always surprises me how much everything is logical and consistent between anything that you look at, if it's a genuine thing.
Great, thank you. Yep. Review awesome. And try to reproduce some of your work at my lab. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic.
And Charles, thank you as well.